I'm going to share my screen now. And so can you see Charles Rockey there?
Yes.
We can see it.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm just gonna, I've got 146 pages here, plus we're gonna go through the book a little bit. Let's go here. So what I'm gonna do is show, so I have an outline, and so the first section is just to kind of show some pictures of Rockey. And let me ask you something. When I go over here, do you now see the website for the Heritage Center, or you just still see
we see the Heritage Center website.
Okay, good. So I'm actually able to switch applications. So here's the web page announcing this event, and some people might think that this is a photograph. In fact, it is a painting by Ed McKay, and I see that Ed is part of the group here. Hello, Ed. And so Ed did this very nice painting of Rockey, and about a year ago, Ed, myself, and a couple other people, I think Rob Moreland, who is trying to do a sculpture of Rockey, and then maybe Noah also gave a talk, or two different talks. So a year ago, some of this, what you're going to see is the same information. So Ed is a painter, and here is a picture of Rockey with that painting. And here are a couple of other pictures of Rockey by Ed. And on the right here, by the way, can you see my mouse? Can you see my hand hovering over the?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. And so here we've got a sprite or a fairy kind of floating, and there's plenty of sprites and fairies and angels in Rockey's work and in the book. And then here's a very touching picture of Hannah towards the end of Rockey's life, kind of leaning over and giving him a kiss on the head. And then towards the end of his life, he needed a wheelchair, so here he is, kind of dozing off. And so Rockey was a very well-known figure in Manitou Springs, and he had his home and his studio right on Canyon Avenue. So he was very accessible. So here's a picture of Rockey working away with his granddaughter, Hannah's daughter, Anadia, and maybe 15 or 18 years later, here they both are at the Fine Arts Center. And I think somebody was mentioning, Mike was mentioning Ohio, and I think Anadia right now is in Ohio. Here's Rockey on his bench out in front of his building. Here he is, very concentrating on writing. So this is something that Rockey wrote about himself. So if you want to take a read about that, I'll let you read that. So in a way, it talks about his father and sort of the challenge that he had to make the choice of being an artist, and that his profession for, I think, about 30 years was as a teacher. I really like this picture. I knew Rockey's.
Excuse me, David. I'm sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. We had a request here to put things on full screen.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, David. Sorry.
Yeah, good suggestion. Good suggestion. So here's Rockey, and I knew Rockey starting in about 2000, and I never knew Rockey as somebody who was able to walk easily. And so I find this a very interesting picture. Why do so many people know Rockey? For many reasons, but one is that he lived on the first floor of this building, and he was very accessible. And so the building itself is quite interesting. And so right here, I believe that the Heritage Center put these plaques in place. Do you know, Mike, if that was something that the Heritage Center did? I know Michelle Anthony had a lot to do with it, and Deborah Harrison.
Yeah, I think it was actually the Historic Preservation Commission.
Okay, good. So, Manitou is a historic town, and this commission has created these plaques, and this building is considered a significant historical building. And so built in 1887, and then the person who built it, I believe, had some positions in the Manitou Springs government. So here's a picture that I found in Rockey's basement, and here you can see that this used to be a radio and TV shop. Isn't that interesting? TV sales and services. Here's the town clock. And then the person who wrote on the back of this is the grandson of the person, Isaac Davis. So kind of some interesting history about that building. And so, again, the idea here is that here's Rockey in the window making art, and people could literally watch him at work at his desk there. So to the left of his studio, to the right is what we're now calling the print room, Rockey's print room. And here he is with his now passed away son, Ivan, just kind of relaxing out in front of his house, which happens to be a very popular place in Manitou. Here he is at Halloween with kids. And this is this scary person here. So Rockey was a son, he was a brother, he was a student, he was in the military, he was a husband and father, he was a student again to get his master's degree, he was a teacher, he was a citizen, and he kind of said that when he moved to Manitou in about 1972, that he really found himself as an artist. And he was a devout church member, and he was a friend to all. So Rockey wasn't always old. Here's the pictures of young Rockey. And here he is at the entrance to the Chicago Art Institute. And I do not know if this artwork up here is his work, but you can tell by, see this person over here on the right? I think that's about where Rockey is standing, in front of the Chicago Art Institute. And I think I can mention later that these lions ends up in one of his stories in the book. Here he is during his college days, during some kind of a get-together dinner. Here he is in the background. So he goes to the Chicago Art Institute, and then he goes to Ohio State to get a master's degree. And this is a very thorough essay. And so I was looking through, and I'll hold it up here. So you can see me on your screen up in the corner, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna hold up a little box. And so this little card box is full of these cards. And I believe that these were created while he was getting his master's degree. And you can see here that way back in 1960, he's doing writing things in order. So this is 46 through 60. Let me go to 1 through, so these are numbered cards. So listen to some of the things he's already doing in 1960s. Evaluate the self and the world, growth of relatability, refined taste, nature and space compatibility, viewpoint, ego outlook, true comprehension, justification, knowing and testing the self, testing relatability, sensitized brackets, identifying purpose. In a way, a lot of people might think of Rockey as somebody who's just a painter, but I feel like he had, with his master's degree in teaching, really did verbalize and write down through essays and through a lot of this teaching, some of the things that actually end up in the book. So he was a teacher, and a lot of times in the book, he's really trying to teach. So he did these cards while he was getting his master's degree. You see here it says teaching technique, and this is learning psychology and philosophy. And so, you know, fresh reality, giving reason, you know, visionary greatness, mental reality organist. So I just found this an interesting find by myself as far as kind of knowing the thoroughness of Rocky's master's degree in teaching. So he has a master's degree in being a teacher. And I think, you know, a lot of times you don't appreciate that when you say, what did you do? I taught junior high or middle school art classes. This is an interesting find for me that he was already very, let's say, aware of a lot of the concepts that end up in the book, 40, 50 years later. Here he is with his dad and his wife, Rose, and I think these are his first two children, Ivan and Noah here. And then in the backyard, and this will show up later, he made his own little creative little pool here. And I believe that they lived near Memorial Park, and this might be Memorial Park. And here he is, I think, at Memorial Park also with a German Shepherd. So this is early in his life as a father. Now, Noah, do you know if he owned this building?
Yes, that was where I spent the first 6 years of my life, and it used to be a laundromat that he converted into our residence.
Yeah. And so is this somewhat near Memorial Park?
It's basically downtown Colorado Springs.
Yeah. And so he made some signs. He called it at first the Quilt Bed Gallery, Rockey and Sons Art Proprietors, established 1967. So one of the things I will say is that Rockey was, you know, his entire life dedicated to art. And so here he is as a teacher. Here he is getting a cake, I guess, a celebration cake at school. Here he is getting an award, an Amani Award, and ironically, this is a Ken and Tina vase, Ken and Tina Restore vase. And then here he is with the book in his studio. So let's see here. I'm going to show you some early work. And then in general, I'm going to talk about the kinds of subject matter that he did throughout his life. The fantasy illustrations sort of start pretty early in the 60s, as well as some of the double imagery. And so Rockey liked to say, I have three kinds of work. I've got landscapes, and then I add building portraits and townscapes. You know, landscapes was just nature. Townscapes might be mostly town and or nature, and building portraits might be just individual house portraits, portraits of people, figure paintings, sculpture. And then he would say, I do fantasy illustrations, double imagery, and landscapes. Those were the three that he liked to say that he did. Here's an early work, 1953. Okay, I zoomed in here, and you can see that he early on has a style of, let's say, unusual characters. Here you have these people in hats and things like that. And so let's say it's an expression, let's say. So here is an early relief sculpture, and it's somewhat abstract. So these are two figures. Here you've got a person here, and then two children here. So this is actually figurative work. It's very, let's call it geometric and abstract. And here's another similar work. This could be a promotional picture. And so you can see it's very linear style. So this is early work, and he was a teacher. So I'm going to apologize. I skip around a little bit. I'm going to come back to some other earlier work. But here he is in his classroom. And he was very fun with his students, and he would do these sort of, and actually this sort of appears sometimes in his book, sort of these trick visuals where things might be, you know, a little bit unusual. So I think he really had a lot of fun with his students. you've got a cutout in the table, and you've got somebody's head here. Here you've got two people as one, and then here's somebody's leg sticking out where the arm should be, and then here's some people behind a canvas. This is kind of ironic, isn't it, too? Sort of fun about the potential thing about the artist and working on something that's larger than themselves, something like that. Here's some of his other work that is not a landscape and is not a fantasy illustration. And he doesn't necessarily acknowledge it, but he was an excellent portrait artist. And he's had sketchbooks, many sketchbooks, and constantly drawing or painting. He did figure paintings and figure drawings. And then he also did a lot of what I call house portraits around Manitou. So many house portraits. So how did I get involved with Rockey? I was a Business of Arts Center studio artist, and I arrived when Deborah Thornton was just about to hand off the executive director position to Rodney Wood. And while I was there, I think during my first year, I got a part-time position there, sort of as the office assistant. And so when the 2001 Rockey exhibit called Art Is started to come together, I and Rockey sat down and created the brochure / invitation for the show. And so that's when I first started working with Rockey, was to make the brochure for his Art Is exhibit. That exhibit was a super success. It was on the cover. Rockey was on the cover of all three local papers, the Independent, the Gazette, and what was the Springs magazine. And the show sold out very quickly. And because of that success, Hannah and Rockey said, let's make a book. You've always wanted to make a book. So that's how I got involved with the book. And we worked together for 12 years part-time. We met maybe 2, 3, 4 times a week for 2 or 3, 4 hours, sometimes longer. And so we had studios at the BAC, and then we moved our studio behind the Commonweal at what I call the Red Bridge Studio. So here's a picture of that exhibit in 2001. All of these sold. In fact, the exhibit was so in demand that there was a schedule of people who could show up and when they would be allowed to buy things. So here you've got a schedule of level 1 persons, level 2, level 3. And so people were lined up out the door on a cold winter's day to get in to look at the work and buy the work. And the reason there was such demand is Rockey was sort of very rarely sold his work. In fact, many of you know that he will not sell his work. However, he will loan it out. So here is the inside of the brochure. And a lot of the work that is in this brochure is also in the book. And so we'll take a look at that. But this brochure, similar to the 1992 exhibit that he had at the Business of Arts Center, had an essay in it. And for each of those 2 shows, and I think he had a show at the Loop as well, he made a poster. So this is the poster for the 1992 show, and then the poster for the Art Is exhibit is a nice townscape of Manitou. So one of the things that Rockey and I did was we went to the Colorado College library, and we looked at these reprints of old Celtic drawings. And here's Rockey taking notes because he wanted the book to seem like an old tome or an old manuscript. And one of our inspirations was the Celtic manuscripts. So the Colorado College had some of these prints. So that's a picture of us at the Colorado College. Here's our studio after we moved to the Red Bridge. On the right is a painting of the Red Bridge. This is behind the Commonweal. And here we are. Here's Rockey's table. He would sit over there. This is our book. And then, so these are the 4 levels of the book. So each of these boxes had the stories that went with that level. So very close to Rocky's place. So he just had to walk out his door, down the alley and around the corner here. So here's an etching that he'd done years before. This is the red bridge that he had painted years before he ever worked on the book or knew that this was going to be our studio. And then this is the view looking up Lafayette Avenue. So Rockey would paint and draw and do etchings of things that were within walking distance. So basically, we're going to take a look at the book here. So it's a book of unconnected 1 or 2 page stories. Many of those images in the book already existed. Several of the 3 or 4 page essays are written for the book, and they're more about understanding, you know, how to understand art and things like that. So there's different sources for imagery within the book. And in a way, for today, when I was kind of getting ready, in a way, it's a book full of characters, right? Different characters and different scenes, you know, and different things are happening in the scenes. And so unlike landscapes, this really is a book of characters. So he tapped into early work, existing paintings and drawings, and then cloud paper illustrations. And then he also modified existing sculptures that he'd done. And then he did a lot of work specifically for the book. So here's an early work, and it is from 1963. And there's a poem that goes with this. And so he wrote poetry. And so he did a calendar. So this might be one of 12 months. And so this is the poem. And I'm going to be quiet for a second and let you read that. Candlelight giving, wine and laughter, kids with memories ever after. And then oven-baked pie, pecan roast dishes, socks plumb full of dreams and wishes. So this started out being a family picture, but by the time it got into the Love Songs book, this is actually the birth of Christ here. And so this is a story about in his presence, right? And so it turned into something that's more about, it isn't necessarily a casual family picture. So there were other pictures that he did in this series. So some of this work actually ended up in the book. So this is from the early 60s. And he had a lot of these drawings he had this kind of centaur character over here playing a fruit, and then nude maids, you know, bathing or gathering fruit. So early work from the 60s ended up in the book. And then also Rockey took some of his imagery, let's say, from a music festival poster. He was good friends with Bud Ford. And then he converted that. And if you notice that we had to take out Mountain Springs Music Festival and then just say Mountain Music Festival. So we had to modify the original artwork. We had to cover the actual dates of the event with the actual story. So we reused some of his existing artwork. He did a poster for a band called the Blue Whale. And so he then had to modify the image so that it became a story about the whale and how this band kind of gets rescued by the whale. These are early artworks that were done before the book was started. And so in a sense, unlike most books, a lot of times you have a story and you're seeking an illustration for the book. In this case, there's a lot of imagery in Rockey's book that had the image first. So he asked people to come up with stories for these. Okay, so it's sort of interesting. And, you know, there is some writing at the bottom of this. So that's sort of a kind of a reverse sequence there that happens in Rockey's book here. These are all images from the book, but actually they started out as sculptures. Okay, so this is an actual arch This is a sculpture, and then over here we have a story about a couch that's actually, so some of his sculpture got sort of turned into 2 dimensions and became stories in the book. At his round table, at his desk, underneath the table, the pillar that holds up the desk are 3 faces, 1, 2, 3, and then he did a bookshelf over here. So these are sculptures that got into the story, and then this is over here you can see Rockey with his very large frame, and this he calls his magic mirror, and he plays front. You can see his hand over here, and there's a hole in the wall, and so people who haven't been there for the first time think that there's something inside the frame. So he turned that into one of the stories in the book. So another thing that that Rockey liked to do was to hand out these pieces of paper. This one's already been drawn on, and he called it I call it cloud paper, but it's the idea of, and it extends from his teaching, of finding an image inside of this texture paper. So when I kind of discovered it, I wanted to ask him some questions about this cloud paper technique. You know, where did you first come up with the idea? How do you create the color paper? When did you assign it? He would assign it. So in a sense, this is an extension of his teaching. And so what were the objectives or the goals for the assignment, right? And so in a way, if you're if you're an art student in middle school and you are faced with a blank page, it's very challenging. But if you're faced with something that you can find something within, it's much easier, let's say, to invent. So here's some examples of unfinished drawings that never got completed that started from cloud paper. And so he would make many sheets of this cloud paper, and then he would find an eye, a cheek, a mouth, and then he would build the image from there. So I'm going to show you some pictures from the book that look a little bit like this. We have a character over here, we have a character over here. And so here we've got multiple characters. So you can see that there's all kinds of possibilities. Now, when you look at this picture, and then you could look at the same thing sideways. I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to let you think of something that you might see in there. Do you see a face or faces? Do you see animals? Where would you start to draw lines? So this is, yes, anyone want to?
Yeah, I would start either in the bottom left or the mid upper.
Mid upper over here. What do you see, Neil?
No. Over to the left. It's like a figure sitting on rocks with their legs hanging out.
Okay, it's a person sitting like, are these the legs hanging out? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, very good, Neil. So thanks for chiming in. And so there's no right answer, is there? No one right, or there's no wrong answer. Let's put it that way. There's no one right answer. So so anybody can see something and start with it and go from it. And no, so one of the ideas that I had going forward as far as you know, Rockey Studio is to publish these blank sheets and then just let the community create them. And it would be fascinating, I think, to see how many different images could come from the same starting point. So that's a future thing that I think might be a possibility. So here we've got cloud paper, and this ends up in the book, and it's the treasure chest that gets opened and reveals all of the notes and pictures. But this is a piece of cloud paper. Now, I didn't notice it at first, so you might say, where does Rockey come up with all these very unusual compositions? Well, this is a drawing that came from cloud paper. This is a drawing that came from cloud paper. And so once he finds a figure or two, then he builds up the rest of it. So this is an earlier drawing that gets put into a composition, and I already showed you some of those. So, because Rockey had so many images that needed stories, he actually invited a bunch of people that he knew to create stories. And he didn't necessarily leave the stories that were contributed alone. In other words, they were the starting point, and then Rockey would enhance them. So the book has a structure, and it's related to phenomenology. And the phenomenology is something that he picked up, I'm pretty certain, in Ohio. And so I'm going to just go over it real quick what the 4 levels are, okay? And so the 4 levels of analyzing or experiencing artwork are: the first level is the sensuous experience. And it's really just trying to respond to the elements of art. It's sort of what I call formal analysis: line, shape, color, texture, okay? And so it's really what I would call formal analysis. And so you're not doing any interpretation. The second one, you are describing, you're identifying. So that's called the representative level. In other words, what is being representative? The objects or the actions in the picture. And then the next level beyond that is the symbolic level. It kind of says what is being said. What is, when you add the elements and what is being represented, you're trying to get some meaning or symbolism out of it, its meaning or its purpose. And then the fourth level is the total expression, which he talks about, where everything, all of those things come together, and it's all sort of adds up. So the book has that structure. So there is a level 1 or a part 1 to the book, which is organized by images that have a more simplistic approach or more direct. And then the next level gets a little bit more complex. And then the third level gets even more, let's say, symbolic or meaningful. And then the fourth level, which is called total expression. So one of the things that Rockey does here in this particular part of the book, and by the way, this idea of these levels of art, he does talk about this in several different places throughout the book. And he kind of keeps saying it in sort of different ways. So what he does in this particular story is that the Bonnie sister, instead of having levels of art, she extends this idea of appreciating art into how to live and how to act with manners of being using the same 4. So in a sense, he translates them. And so for her manner of being, it's called awakening, okay? Sort of a beginning, an awakening. And then the next one is understanding as a manner of being. And then the next one is appreciating. And then the fourth one is creating. Okay, so they're kind of connecting to each other. And then you can see that Rockey even wants to go forward and give sub-levels. So here we've got a number 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have a number 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in a sense, sometimes when you hear you would hear Rockey talk, he would say, not only there's 4 levels, there's 16, where the 4 get extended to another 16. So there was this sort of sometimes hard to understand and hard to explain levels of the book. And it's funny, sometimes Rockey himself would sometimes, mix the levels of art with the manners of being. And so this is a general notion about the structure of the book, okay? Here's some themes that are in the book, not in any particular order. It is called Love Songs of Middle Time. So there's love of nature, love of family, romantic love, love of place, love of God, that kind of thing. There's a lot of wisdom in the book. And so in general, when we talk about love of nature, he was anti-technology. There's several stories about his dislike of large corporations or big cities. He liked small villages and simple times. So these are all things that appear in the book as far as the content. This is one of the first sketches that he did for the cover of the book. And so you can see that if you have the book, you can see that it always had sort of a frame around it, and that it always had this idea of going through a gateway. and entering into the book. And so one of the things that changes later is that these steps and his name, this is sort of, he gets rid of these steps. And what he does is he creates a little bit of a pond and then a gate in front of it. So this is the first sketch early on. And then you can see that one of the next levels here is that the opening gate here is that we kind of assume this character down here. So we're looking at somebody holding on to a gate, looking into this scene. And then this person disappears. And then also this arch here, this head above the arch, it turns into a heart with wings. And in a way, I feel like he might have felt like this was a bit of a repetition of this three-faced figure up here. So, you know, Rockey did 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sketches of the cover. And then we kept making refinements to it. For instance, these large trees became many, many figures that made up the tree. And so speaking of the 4 levels, Rockey kind of felt like this was an entry into the deepest understanding. And so this outside gate is level 1, the tree is level 2, there's another gate here, and then the third gate is where this couple is opening up this gate. So in a sense, he kind of thought about this as entering in through 4 levels to get to the final level of appreciation and understanding. So here's just an example of an artwork that he had before the book was ever started. And then by the time the book was finished, he went ahead and drew an older face on that particular character, waving to people from inside of his storybook studio.
Dave, can I take a moment just to answer a question?
Yes.
The question was, did Rockey paint with oils or acrylics? And the answer is yes. He used all kinds of different media, crayons, ink, oils, acrylics, watercolors. So it would depend on the specific style of painting that he was doing or the specific scene.
Noah, thank you for that. And I think that might have to do with his being a teacher and having to show students a variety of media. Yes, so he drew, he painted, and it watercolor, ink. He was an etcher, he was a sculptor, so he was not, but let's put it this way, to answer the question differently, most of his landscapes were oil paints. Wouldn't you say that, Noah?
Yeah, that is accurate.
But you could say that a lot of his drawings that were in the book or a lot of his other painting might have been a mixture of work. So good question. And so all questions are good, you get 5. So Rockey was not afraid of doing self-portraits, and I'm just going to show you some self-portraits. And again, I don't think people appreciate how verbal Rockey was. This is the back side of this self-portrait, and this is writing down through the very painful time when he's getting a divorce. And here he is. So in a sense, this is kind of me having fun with the idea that Rockey is not shy of putting himself into a picture. And when I look at this picture, you say, how could you come up with this? And in a way, when you think about the cloud paper, you can see how the image sort of develops through the given surface rather than, let's say, having an idea in advance. So here he is up here. He's in this one twice, sort of, in my opinion. That's called Portrait of Hannah from 1990. Here he is, I think very much like him. Sort of the ability of the artist to create realities and for the realities, let's say, to talk back to them. So I'm just going to show a couple of the images from the book. This is actually a cookie sheet, and it was a rusted cookie sheet, and he painted on it, he let some of the rust from the cookie sheet show through. Here he is here. Here he is here. Or somebody like him. So we're going to go through the book, and I'm going to tell you some interesting things about particular stories. So this is early on. This is about Noah New here, the birth of Noah New, a poem to go with it. So you can see how this sort of relates to his early 60s work, where he's using these unusual characters with wings and, unusual horns and tails and things like that. And so here is that pond that's out in the back of the yard here. And here's one of the stories in the book. And you can see down here is a picture of the pond. So in a sense, when you look at this and you think, well, that's fantasy, that's all made up. Well, in a way, it's Rocky's way of rendering what actually happened, right? And so, Rockey, this might have happened in 1965 or 63. And he's got these pictures in his drawer somewhere, or his cabinets, and then he's making the book. And then years later, oh yeah, I remember that. I was lifting Ivan or Noah out of the water, and we were splashing around in a hot summer day in the backyard. And so, in a way, this particular story is talking about the ideal world. And then the sort of the breakup, let's say, where things get all disorganized, and he's trying to find, how to get it back together. And here's his parents giving him some advice, and then here's some of his fellow artists giving him some advice. And then things get resolved, and here he is rebuilding his life with, made up toys and things like that. Here he is as a father over here with gifts to children. And so here it is on I love you, pause. Yep. And then just kind of giving somebody a bouquet of flowers, and the very joyous response. So what I'm getting at here is some of the imagery in the book is about family and children. And so Rockey had two daughters, and this is a story about two daughters and sort of their struggle with evil. And this is a story about two brothers and sort of their brotherhood and their challenges to fight good and bad. This is a story about Noah. And Noah is a professional in the lighting industry. So Rockey wrote a story in the book about his son. This is a story about Ivan. Ivan ended up buying and renovating many pieces of property. So I think this might have been done specifically for Ivan, but it's basically a picture of somebody who's dealing with, buildings and villages and things like that. This is a artwork for Ivan after he had passed away. We started the book in 2001. We finished in about 2013, and around 2007 or 8, Ivan passed away. And so this is basically Ivan ascending up into heaven and talking about all that. And then as well, his daughter Sarah passed away a little bit earlier, I think maybe before 2001, I think before I met Rockey. And so he had done some works about her struggle with depression and had written a story about her. And then here he is meeting up again and connecting with Sarah in after he passes away. He did, Rockey, several stories about his getting older. Here he is walking with his cane, and so he anticipated his death and wrote about it in several of the stories. So a lot of people know Rockey as a painter, and here he is outdoors painting, and you can see here on this canvas how I would say quick and rough his brush strokes are. And so you can see that he really is kind of sketching in the overall composition in, I would say, somewhat of a rough way, but he goes ahead and refines it later. And off on the left here, you can see that this is up by Ruxton Canyon here. So this is probably going to be a Pikes Peak painting, and he did many of those, one of his favorite topics. Here's a young Hannah with a young Anadia outdoors painting with Puppy. Here he is in the Memorial Park right behind City Hall. There's his dog Puppy. I think that puppy was around for about 17 years. I think this is also behind City Hall. He had this truck, and here's all the kids, right? So we've got somebody up here, we've got one here, and then this could be Hannah. So Hannah, Sarah, Noah, and Ivan, or those could be switched. So he drove around that for a long time, and here it is being built. And then here he is with Puppy. And then so that got put into a garage at one of Ivan's property about 2 years ago. It was retrieved from that garage. It's now in Littleton, I think. And Noah has restored that truck. And hopefully might build up the back of that. So here's some pictures of Rocky, some paintings of Rocky. He loved Dove chocolate ice cream. And so how much time do we have, Neil? Are we going to go till 11? Or are we going to go till 11:15? How long do you want me to keep going?
I think it depends on when people begin dropping off.
Okay.
You know, but I'd say you probably would want to wrap up by 11:15.
Okay.
I think.
Well, so let's do this. What we could do now is sort of say what we're going to do next, and then those who wish to can leave, and then those who wish to can stay for another 20 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and take a look through the book and tell some different stories about different stories within the book. But what I'd like to do for those who are still here, or for everyone who's still here, what I'd like to do is to say that, as Mike said at the beginning, the book is available at the Heritage Center here, but it's also available at this website. And also, there's a couple of essays that I would like to share. The essays, let me get over to those, are the essays from the shows, if somebody wants them, from the, let's say, the 2001 essay. So what I've done is I've extracted the essay, and so this is the, I'll hold it up. So here's a little actual brochure from 2001. And so this really is, so here's the mailing label. And so in a sense, Rocky sent everybody an essay about art when he invited them to his show. And he did the same thing in 1992 as well. So what I'd like to do, Mike, is to put onto the website under this event this essay. It's similar to what you will find in the book. So a lot of the stuff that's in the book was in Rocky's kind of vocabulary and mind for years and years and years, okay?
Well, that'd
So
be,
anyway.
that's great, David. We'd be proud to display that on our website. You know, again, it tells the story of the man.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, we also like to also encourage people to ask questions by posing your question on at the chat button located at the bottom of your screen. And David, we'll go as long as you want to go here, but
Okay,
thank you.
good. So this essay from 2001, he talks about, you know, where he grew up, when he went to school, and then here's the same thing we were just talking about here. And this is in the brochure he sent out. We probably printed 1,500 of those and sent them out to the mailing list. I really stepped into the outside world with the next phase of my life: marriage, 4 children, 8-to-5 job, insurance, credit cards. I focused my art on making our home into a Middle Earth environment. Inside, I carved figures holding up the beams, the throne of chairs for toilets, fashioned built-in bunk beds, stained glass windows, carved Dutch doors, handmade Tiffany lamps. So you can see that, you know, he was not only making art to be framed on a wall, he made his world, he surrounded himself and made his world into a work of art. So we'll put that on the Heritage Center website. And so anybody who wants to can go to the Heritage Center for the book, but if you want other things like etchings or posters or the book, you can go to the Square website here. So Rocky, so Noah, what I'd like you to do, if you could, is just talk about a little bit about the future of Tan Canyon Avenue and what you see happening in the future for Rockey's studio.
Sure. Thanks for that opportunity, Dave, and great job reviewing everything. There's brought up a lot of memories for me with some of those pictures and the artwork. So I do appreciate that. And hello to everybody. It's good to see those of you who I can see. My dad did love chocolate of all kinds. Dove was his favorite, as well as chocolate ice cream. What we have planned for the studio, as Dave had mentioned, is that my dad didn't want to sell any of his artwork. He wanted the ability to have everybody who wanted to enjoy it to be able to enjoy it, not just those who had a lot of money. So the only time that he sold artwork was at his show in 2001. So what we planned to do at the studio, and this is my dad's wishes, was to create a not-for-profit art museum. And we are well into that process. We are waiting for approval for the not-for-profit through the government channels. And it will remain in the building there on 10 Cannon Avenue, pretty much unchanged as much as we can keep it the original studio where he lived and created and was inspired. That is our intent for that building and for his artwork. And David had mentioned a few things about having the cloud paper there, about having paintings available for loan or prints available for loan. And all of that stuff is in process, but except we're waiting for official approval from the government forces that approve not-for-profits.
Yeah, so Noah, you've applied for a 501c3 nonprofit organization status, and then once that gets approved, by having that designation, you'll be able to start raising money and start spending money under that definition rather than trying to do it now outside of that context. Correct.
Yeah. And since my dad had the show in 2001, he used all the money he raised there to print his book. The unfortunate part about having to create a museum out of this is he didn't leave any funds to do it with. So we will need to do some fundraisers to keep this alive and active.
I have a question. We have a very active volunteer community here in Manitou Springs, as you know. If anyone wants to help with the putting together of this amazing museum project, or if they wish to donate, how do we do that? Who do we contact?
You can contact myself or David Ball if you prefer. And I would love any kind of donations or assistance. Unfortunately, for I guess legal reasons, we can't accept donations until the not-for-profit is set up. So that's kind of been a hold on getting things started. But what David and I are going to do is complete a website, and on that website we will have, the idea is to have a link there for anybody who would like to volunteer. Any kind of help would be greatly appreciated.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
We look forward to seeing that, Noah.
Me too.
Yeah. So Rockey kept a lot of things. He has letters and postcards from years and years ago, and so there's a lot of sorting to do, and there's a lot of organizing to do. So there's plenty to do once we get things set up as a nonprofit. So there's opportunities. Let's put it that way.
And Michael, I don't know if you have my phone number or email address. If you know somebody who wants to volunteer, please get them in touch with me.
Yeah, so what we can do is, Noah, when we put links up to some of the articles or essays, we can also add how to contact you on
Perfect.
the page. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that was a little bit about Rockey. What I'd like to do now is just go ahead and take a quick look through the book. If anybody has any questions about what we've talked about so far or the book, you're welcome to ask Noah. Here, by the way, is the website whereby you can buy the book or the poster for the 2001 show. And so, Noah, I want to correct you a little bit. I believe that in addition to the 2001 show, he might have had a show at the Loop where he might have sold work or not. And then he had a show at the Business of Art Center in 1992. So I don't know if he didn't sell any work at either of those, but I would imagine that he would have sold some work at one of those other exhibits.
I'm not sure if he did sell work at those shows. I don't think he did, but my memory could be faulty on that.
Okay, so we do have a website that has a store, and so through Square, and so these are posters or etchings that Rockey has done over the years. So let's see here. Let's take a quick look at some things in the book. Let's go like that. So the spine of the book talks about the 4 levels as well. Okay, so in a way, those relate to the 4 levels. When we zoom into the cover of the book, you can see that also there are 4 keys down here. And so that's another kind of reference to the 4 levels. So when you do open up the book, you'll see that there are introductory pages. So here's the cloud paper and the treasure chest where you find the actual contents of the book. And so what these pages are in the book is they're transparent pages. And what he did is he asked people to talk about music. And so several of his music friends wrote things down. So what happens here is the story goes every other line. So on the front side of the page, it's the first, third, and fifth line. And on the back page, it's the second, fourth, and eighth line, okay? So it's text about music, and it's kind of a transparent introduction page to the book. The full name of the book is Love Songs Echoed Through Illuminations, the Images, and Fables, the Stories. And then by C.H. Rockey and Together with Friendfolk, meaning that this is where he's asking people to help with stories. Several introductions to the story, how it all began, and how he so it starts out. You know, what's the very first word? My daughter and I set out to dig a deep well, and so they discover a treasure chest. So I'm just going to point out a couple things. I'm going to randomly go through here. There's an interesting illustration where Rockey is literally reaching through the book to connect to whomever might encounter the book. And then here we've got a poster that I believe that he did for the school. So that's a piece of artwork that existed where he adapted it. Now this image, I think, on the right was done for the book, and it really talks about the idea of the impulse to do artwork from the very beginning of time. This is a sequence, so in a sense, a lot of the stories in the book don't connect, but in a sense, these next 4 pages do. Here he's sleeping and he's a little bit concerned, and then he talks about the futility of war, and then here we've got the actual scene of war, and then we have kind of the conclusion, or let's say, okay, I've had that fear, but things are going to be okay. So then here we have level 1, and then we have the level which is awakening, or the sensuous surface, and then we have level 1A with some stories, level 1-2 with some stories, and level 1-3. So we did a lot of shuffling around and ordering of things here in the book to pair up pages together. And so you can see this early work is from the early 60s in terms of the kind of imagery that he's doing. And so it starts out with marriage and then children. And then this is about the two daughters' struggles, let's say. And so again, here's another work on the right-hand side from the early 60s with the same poem. So this poem existed from probably the mid-60s, and it did not change at all, okay? So here's a double image, and there are several of them in the book. where we can simultaneously see two things at once. Another, perhaps a little bit of a double image here. So the structure of the book is artwork, a frame that is scanned and or flattened out to make it look like a drawing, a drop cap, a title, and then a drop sock. And the reason we needed these drop socks is to help visually tell the reader that the story did not continue on another page. And so we have a lot of 1- and 2-page stories. We have some spreads or 2-page stories. And then again, here is a drop cap and a drop sock. So when you look at this page, you kind of know that there's nothing that's going to continue on the next page. And so here is a reference to the Celtic type of imagery here with the drop cap that has sort of a framework that goes with it. This, I believe, was a poster where down in the corner on this shield, it announced that Rockey was having a show at the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center, mid-70s, I think. And so what he did, and I have no idea how this relates to the actual original poster, but here you've got the king and the queen, let's say, up on their pedestal. But this turns into a story about a person who is getting married, and he practices and practices and practices his marriage vows. And when it comes time for the marriage, he kind of doesn't quite say it right. And the bride-to-be says, I know what you mean. So anyway, some of these images existed beforehand and some existed afterward. Here's an example of a story that really is a 3-page story. And it's more about, lessons or wisdom and how to be responsible or how to react to nature and things like that. So let me just go through some imagery in the book here. So here's another actual sculpture. This is an actual bed, and it got turned into a story. And what it turns out is the 3 phases of life: birth, sort of adulthood, and the time to enjoy and float on clouds of joy, let's say, as an adult, and then sort of the grave site, right? So my childhood, my grown man, and my body's final rest. So anyway, the book has so many different stories, and all of this writing. It's interesting when Mike introduced the book, he says, not only does it have interesting stories, it has interesting images. And I kind of come at it from the other side, which is not only are there interesting pictures, there's some fascinating things to read in the book. So one of the things that you can see here is that Rockey did a lot of writing. And he's trying to explain how to understand art and life. And he's using a lot of sometimes pre-existing artwork and sometimes new artwork. So this might have existed beforehand. These 2 on the right were done for the book. This existed beforehand, as well as this one, or it might have been done for the book, existed beforehand, and this was done for the book, and then this was done for the book. Now, again, going into this idea of the 4 levels, if you notice, so basically what we have is a long story, and what is the conclusion? The conclusion is love. And you'll see here that there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 in the L, and then there's a 5, 6, 7, 8 in the, and then 11, 12, 13, 14. You see what I'm saying? So he's snuck the numbers in here. So a little bit obsessive about the numbering. So let's see here. Again, this one on the right is an actual sculpture. It's a newel post. And it's a sculpture that he did years before he ever was going to do the book. And so he had this sculpture. He says, what could I make? What could the story be about this? And really what it's talking about is these 2 lovers embracing each other. And they're sort of functional instead of these 2 over here, Atlas and Venus over here, who are dedicated as sculptures. So in a sense, there's a little bit of talk about their functionality as a newel post. And the fact they're in a museum and they're saying, the Atlas and Venus get all the attention and we don't get all the attention. And then they say, I think what they do here is the conclusion is we have each other. That's what matters. So again, this pipe dream image he had from years before. And in a sense, this doesn't need a story, does it? The image sort of tells it all. Now, here's an example on the right of the door to self. And what he does to put it into the book is he breaks it down into little sections. And I don't know if he had these when he did the sculpture, but what he does is he talks about this group of people, this person over here. So kind of a fascinating way to take a sculpture and turn it into individual components that add up to a total story. So I see it's 11:15. There are 240 pages in this book, so we can't go through it all at one time. Here's another image that existed without a story. And I don't know if somebody volunteered this. So let's go to the end. Here's a sculpture that existed beforehand. So there's a mixture of imagery. This is a sculpture that got turned into a fun story. And so a lot of the work already existed, and then he needed to give it a story to go with it. Now these, because he was a teacher, I believe that these are drawings of North Junior High, which to me is near downtown, and it's got a lot of very special architecture to it. They don't build schools like this anymore. But this is basically a story about the value of education. So let's just go to the end of the book here. And actually, the actual book, which I have here, Rockey sort of could keep going and going and going. That was one of the amazing things that I really admire about Rockey, is that a lot of times I would say to myself, Rockey, that story's done, isn't it? That picture's pretty good. The layout's pretty good. Isn't that kind of done? And he'd come back and say, I changed something about this. I want to add a paragraph here, and I want to make another thing here, add another picture. And so the same thing happened here at the end of the book. You'll find that I think this has now been moved over to the right, and there's another full page of writing. So that's sort of in conclusion, one of the things that I would say about Rockey was that he was so thorough about continually looking at and re-investigating what some people might have thought was finished. So he was really willing to keep working on something over and over again. And so the end of the book, these last pages in here, he kind of kept working on it. Now, this is the entire page of thanks here. And so let's just go over this real quick, and I think we'll finish it up here, unless somebody has questions. This is the thank you page. And then so here he says, listed here are those who inspired many of the stories. And he names the story and then who participated in it. So Connie Mulligan, Reverend Dave Hunting, Becky Elder, Ken Reister, Nancy Rosenauer, Noah Rockey might have made one, Jeff Harms, Corky Rockey. So you can see that this is his listing at the end of the book of those people who actually participated by actually, making a suggestion for the story. So I think I'm going to end it there. I certainly don't think that we can go through the entire book all at once. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning. Mike, if you wanted to chime in a little bit.
Well, thank you again. We have with us this morning David Ball and Noah Rockey. The artist is Manitou artist Charles Rockey. The book again is Love Songs of Middle Time. And the book is still available in several locations throughout the city, including the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. The book is priced at a very reasonable price. And again, it's a very interesting read, as well as an interesting view of the images created by this wonderful artist, Charles Rockey.